Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Illinois Green Party. I'm your host, David Rych. Sorry, but you're going to have to look at my salted up truck in my background because my normal studio where I do it is like a season room, which is all windows, and it's about 10 degrees in there. So here I am. And we here have tonight a recurring guest, Lierre Keith, co-founder of the Deep Green Resistance and author and co-author of several books. Tonight, we're going to be talking about her book, The Vegetarian Myth, which I might get some flack for from some people on the left, which is okay because I think we need to bring up some of these points because she made a lot of good ones.
Sorry,
okay.
the dogs are going crazy. Just give me 1 second.
That's okay. She's there with her Great Pyrenees crew, and they're fabulous. So as soon as she's done, we'll get started with her book, The Vegetarian Myth. Okay. So she needs to tend to the doggies, which is cool. So anyway, I hope everybody's doing well, surviving this apocalyptic chill that has covered the country. And it's been in the negative degrees here, not even including wind chill. It's been awful, and hopefully we start our break tomorrow. The temperature, it's going to be a balmy 14 degrees tomorrow here in the Midwest. That's fabulous. But anyway, hope everybody stayed safe. It's doing well. And we're going to get going here in a moment. So anyway, happy New Year to everybody. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, every once in a while they all go crazy. And I have
okay.
5 of them, so they make so much noise. There's like no way to do an interview. It's not usually this bad.
That's okay.
Just
That's
once or twice a day. It had to be now. So anyway, I'm back.
Okay, we're good. All right, Lierre Keith, author of The Vegetarian Myth. So let's talk about that. So I know that I'm personally, I've mentioned to you before and other times, I'm certified in horticulture, and so I do understand the data concerning the dangers of agricultural, at least definitely like commercial agricultural practices nowadays, how they just deplete the soil of nutrients, they destroy microbial ecosystems, not to mention other types of ecosystems, such as like tearing down forests and all sorts of pastures and prairies and so on. For example, Illinois called the prairie state something like it was 60 some odd percent prairie before, industrialization hit it. And now it's something like 3% or something nonsense. It's just like gone.
It's all gone.
Yeah, it's devastating, literally. And so let's talk about that. It's a very interesting book and very important, I think, that people get out there and read this book. She generally, there's more nuance than this, but she goes and she talks about the not so great health things concerning vegetarian diet, and also again the agricultural devastation. So wherever you'd like to start, please.
Well, let's start with the agricultural devastation since you live in Illinois.
Okay.
So the soil, when the European colonialists first got there, was measured in feet. It was in places 10 to 12 feet deep, and it can now only be measured in inches. And that's 200 years. That's all it took, because this is the nature of agriculture. And this is the part that's really hard to understand. I did not get this. I spent 20 years as a vegan, and I did not understand this. And it wasn't until I started trying to grow my own food that I really had to come to grips with what this meant. But agriculture is the exact opposite of nature, because nature's pattern is perennial polycultures with animals integrated into it.
Right.
So what that means is a lot of different kinds of plants mostly live a long time. In nature, it's like, 95% of all plants are perennial plants. And what that means is they live a long time. Perennial just means many years. And that's in contrast to annuals, which only live, like 2-3 seasons.
Right.
And if you think about a tree, this becomes self-evident, because there's no way anybody could grow that tall in like 6 months. It's out of the question. That trees live a long time, whether it's 300 years or 2,000 years or 10,000 years. That trees, they've been there a long time. It's just not going to happen that quickly. And it's the same with the grasses. It's just we don't think about perennial grasses in the same way, but we should. It's just on a prairie, on a grassland, there's very little moisture. That's why there's no trees there. It's really just a function of the rain. There's not enough rain. So instead, what you have is the forest is underground. So you have this incredibly extensive root system, And that's how the grasses survive during the really, really dry, hot summers. All the biological activity retreats underground. And so there's this massive root system that happens underneath that we don't see. And so we don't really think about it, but that's what's there. And that's what keeps the whole thing alive, when there's no moisture at all during the summer. Anyway, that's the perennial part of it, is that they live a long time. The other part of that is perennial polyculture. So it's a lot of different kinds of plants. So in a healthy grassland, 1 square meter should have about 25 different plants in it. So you just think about the level of biological diversity that's supposed to be there,
Right.
right? And so this is all kinds of different plants that do all kinds of different things, right? And they make a community. So some of them are going to be better at some things than others, but all together they make life continue in whatever environment they're in. And they are, time has done this, evolution has done this, so that everybody, plays a role, and they all help each other, and then they eat each other, and then they help each other, and that's what life is.
Right.
So that's what happens on a prairie. And then prairies in particular, it becomes really, it's so the action of the animals is so desperately necessary so quickly, and that's because, again, there's not a lot of moisture. So in places like the rainforest, which are very hot and very moist, there's almost no soil, because the biological activity it burns so hot, because of all the moisture and the heat. But in a place like a prairie, it's absolutely the opposite, and that's why there's that really deep soil. But it's the creatures that keep it going, that can actually degrade the cellulose. It's very specific. You have to really be specialized to do this. Like, you and I cannot eat grass. You might not have thought about that before, but what that means is you can't digest cellulose. So we can't just go out and eat a tree. We can't just go out in the morning and eat grass for breakfast. You know this instinctively. You know that you cannot eat grass. Obviously, when people are starving, they'll try anything, but you can't extract nutrients from it because you're not a ruminant. And there's other animals that do it too, but the ruminants play this incredibly central role on grasslands. And what they do is, they're called a ruminant because they have this thing called a rumen, and it's a very specialized sort of digestive system. They have 4 stomachs, and their stomachs are neutral, not acid. We have very acid stomachs. Theirs are completely neutral. The reason is because they're making a home for bacteria. And if it was more acid, all the bacteria would die. So it has to be a very neutral pH. So they're this giant vat, essentially, that walks around carrying these bacteria. And it's the bacteria that actually do the work of digesting the cellulose. Okay, so a cow or a bison, it's a community. We are all communities of our own. We think of ourselves as individuals, and that's true. We are in some ways, but when it comes down to it, we also are communities, and we have millions, billions of other creatures living inside us, on us, helping us, trying to eat us, doing all kinds of other stuff, and we're just habitat for them. Right. So long, long time ago, billions of years ago, when the grasses first started, the ruminants, the bacteria, and these plants all decided that they could work together to make a much, for them all to survive, but also to make that kind of resilient community together, which is what evolution loves. Evolution loves a community. So you've got the ruminant carrying around these bacteria. The bacteria can eat the grasses, and the grasses need to be eaten. So what happens on a grassland when you don't have ruminants is it's quite grim and pretty quick, because there's no one to break down the dead material of the plant bodies. All of that material just piles up on the surface of the ground, and what it means is that it smothers the plants that are there, and so very quickly you have more and more bare dirt between each plant, and ultimately it ends in desertification. And this is because they need the action of the bacteria inside the ruminants to actually digest that material and keep it from building up, and you return it to that biotic community in a way that is usable for life again. So they break it down, and then it can be taken up again as nutrients. So nobody else can do this. Only ruminants can do this. On the Great Plains, that's why there were 60 million bison. They were very, very good at it. And you can see that these plants evolved with these ruminants. I said they need to be eaten, and that's one reason, is to degrade the dead ones. But the other reason is because the action of eating the grasses, if you can, picture a bison or a cow, chomping down on grass, the grasses are totally different than trees. Like I'm looking outside my window right now, and I live in the redwood forest. The tips of the branches of the redwoods, like the very end of the branches, is a different color green, and that's this year's growth. So it's a brighter color green. So most plants, that's how they grow, is from the ends out. Grasses are totally different. They grow from the bottom up. And this is because if they grew from the top, from the very top of the tips and they got eaten, that would be the end of them. But it's completely opposite. They grow from the bottom up so that they can be eaten and survive the munch. And in fact, that stimulates more growth. Every time they get eaten like that, it just means that they put down more roots, and it makes them actually sturdier and stronger. And there's in the saliva of ruminants are enzymes that encourage growth for these plants, for the grasses. So you can see that they're all in this together, and that they've all evolved to do this amazing thing, which is build more life. The life of the prairie absolutely depends on this action. So if you take out one actor in this picture, the whole thing collapses into desert. You have to have the grasses. You need those deep, deep roots. They hold the soil in place. And if you want to see how dramatic it is when that's gone, there are pictures online. You can Google first day of the Dust Bowl, and you will see farms in South Dakota that lost all of their topsoil in one day.
Yep.
From that. Because when you rip up the roots, there's nothing holding that soil in place. And without the soil, there is no life, no land life anyway.
Right.
We owe our entire existence to 6 inches of soil and the fact that it rains. So without that soil, it's over. All right, so that's one thing, is that it literally holds the soil in place when you have those roots. But another thing that the roots do is they provide physical channels for the rain to actually enter the soil. And you know this instinctively, because if you think about every single time you've been outside in the rain, if you're standing somewhere where there's grass or trees or bushes or something, you probably are not standing in a puddle. The moment that you go to a parking lot and it's just bare dirt or like a dirt road, it's nothing but just a marshy puddle. And the more it rains, the more the rain just stacks up, and then you have a flood. And that's because there's no way for that water to actually get into the soil. The moment that you have plants on it, though, with any kind of a root system, they'll draw it down, and that they literally provide the channels so that the rain can then get into the soil. And what it does then is it recharges the water table, so it fills up those kind of underground lakes that we all need to survive. And also the soil itself acts like a giant sponge. But it's the roots, again, that make that possible. And then over the course of the year, on a grassland, there's that hot, dry summer, and those really deep roots are able to then draw that moisture back up out of that soil sponge where all that rain entered in the spring, all the snow melt, all the actual rain. It went in there and it's been in storage. And slowly, as water is needed, those deep, deep roots can pull that water up into the grass bodies, and they make that moisture available to themselves, but also to all the other animals that need some moisture. A lot of animals in nature don't drink, actually. They get all their moisture that they need from eating.
Oh.
So the grass has to be there for them to eat it. That's how they're going to get a lot of their water, is just from the grasses itself. So all of this works together. And then the third thing that those deep roots do is they actually can reach down far enough to the sort of bedrock beneath the soil, and they can degrade that rock. And what they're after is minerals.
Right.
And again, this is a community because the roots themselves don't actually dissolve the rock. They can get down to it and they can kind of attach to it, but they can't actually break it up.
Right.
And the creatures that do that are more bacteria. And so they have a trade where the grasses will trade a molecule of sugar to the bacteria. They feed the bacteria, and the bacteria in exchange will give them minerals. And then the grasses draw the minerals up, and they need them for their own lives, but also it's honestly how the rest of us get minerals is from this kind of action. So then the animals eat the grasses, and then we eat those animals, and then everybody has minerals. You and I cannot eat rock. Even if we had the jaws that could actually chomp it, we don't really have a way to extract minerals from the rock. But those bacteria do that for us. So that's, again, another community that's deeply a part of this, that, without the bacteria and the grassroots, it would just all die. So all of this makes a plant community that, one might call a prairie or a grassland. And it's perfectly evolved to survive really harsh winters and then really, really hot, dry summers. All that life underneath the ground. it's just sort of there as a bank for when, it's a little bit cooler and there's rain again. But also across the surface of the soil, that what keeps the bacteria alive is the ruminants. The bacteria are alive inside those ruminants, and they're repopulating. Every time they poop out cellulose out the other end, they are repopulating the soil with that bacteria. And then it can stay alive. So even if that herd of bison was to die somehow, who knows, some random thing, the bacteria would still be there in the soil for a while. Another herd would come along eventually and repopulate as well. But it's like a bank also of bacteria. So it's an amazing thing. And then another thing that's going on inside that bison or that cow is they're not actually eating the grass. They're feeding it to the bacteria, because it's the bacteria that actually degrade the cellulose. And what the cow or the bison is getting in exchange, they're getting two things. One is they're actually getting the waste products of the bacteria are food for the ruminant. So what they're getting is actually fatty acids. They're getting fat from it. That's what the bacteria are excreting as excrement. To them, that's just a waste product. To the cow, it's great food. So they're actually eating a low carb, high fat diet is what they're eating. And then the bodies of the bacteria are actually a protein source for the cows. So we don't think of it this way because we just see a happy cow on the grass, munch, munch, munch. It's all, beautiful scene. There's the sun and whatever, very bucolic, and everything looks lovely. And it is lovely and it's wonderful. And cows need to be on grass. They shouldn't be in factory farms. But what she's actually eating is not the grass. She's feeding that to her internal bacteria. And so again, it's like this little mini community where they each, they give, they're fed, and then they do the feeding in exchange. Every part of this community is needed for the rest of it to survive. Everybody gets to live, and then we all die. And then, every last molecule gets taken up into some other form of life. And that's what's happening inside the cow with the bacteria. It's what's happening with the prairie and the grasses and the ruminant and the bacteria. And everybody plays a role. All right, this is beautiful. This could go on until the sun burns out. You could come back every year, and all you would see would be more soil, more diversity, more resilient in this. The one thing I haven't mentioned yet is then you do need the predators. And the role that the predators always play is, number one, they keep numbers down. They keep suffering from going on for too long. I know it's gruesome to watch things like, wolves kill a bison. I'm not saying that this is fun for us. We're not used to these things. But it does mean that the weak don't suffer long. That if you have a broken leg in nature, it, you know, a minute later you're dead. It's not you don't linger for years in pain. It's the moment that you're too sick or you're too old or whatever. Nature takes care of it, and the predators eat. So they keep the herd healthy. But the other thing they do is they keep the herd moving, because in order for grass to grow at the appropriate rate, nature's pattern is the ruminants have to be tightly bunched and quickly moving. If you just let them stand there and eat, they'll eat it to the ground. But the moment that you put a predator pressure on the other end of those ruminants and keep them moving, they do exactly what grass needs, which is that they're grazed hard, but then it moves on, and then they can recover. And when the grasses recover, it's very quickly. With that kind of pressure, it's exactly what grasses clearly evolved to do, because it makes the grasses really sturdy and really strong, as well as making the ruminants really sturdy and strong. But you need the predator pressure to keep them moving. Just letting them stand there and graze all day doesn't work. Um, People have tried it and it doesn't work. Like, it just doesn't work. You will have degraded soil at the end of the day.
Right.
So you have to keep them moving. And there's people who have studied this and they can tell you exactly how to do it on your land. Lots of farms you can go to that understand this method, and you can watch them do this, where they move the cows every day, or they move the bison, every 2 days, or whatever their schedule is, depending on their rainfall and what kind of grasses they have and their climate. But it's very specified. You can work it out. You can figure out it's called the S curve of grass. It's how the grass grows is in an S curve if you plotted it on a graph. So you want to always get it when it's like at the peak, and then move the animals off really quickly. And that's what predators do. That's what wolves do. It's what bears do. It's what humans are supposed to do. We have to keep them moving. And without it, again, the whole system dies. So it's kind of an amazing thing when you study how biotic communities work, because
Oh yeah.
everybody plays a role. Like, we talk about the web of life, and that is certainly one way to to have that kind of metaphor. But it's real. It's not actually just like a thought experiment. It's true. Like, every single being in this web needs to be there, or the entire thing will just fall apart. And it's very complicated. I mean, this is like the bare surface, like me talking about this is like you can just
Sure.
spend your life studying this, you'd never get to the bottom of it. 1 tablespoon of soil, of good soil, can contain 1 billion living creatures.
Yep.
I want people to understand the amount of life that should be in the soil. That's 1 billion creatures. Like you cannot even imagine relationships that complex. A billion, that's 1 tablespoon. And there
Yep.
should be 12 feet of it all across the Midwest. So that's what should be happening on a grassland. And then along come humans who decide that they want to do this thing called agriculture. We don't really know why humans took up agriculture. It's still kind of a mystery. I mean, there's all sorts of theories about it. And I've read them all. I've got my favorite. I can't prove it.
Can you
Regardless,
can you talk
go ahead.
about your favorite theory? I actually have somebody who's a PhD in anthropology who, not an expert, but is well studied in like the transformation from hunter-gatherer to agriculture. He's coming on the show hopefully in the next month or so.
Lovely.
So I'll
Yes,
send you the link for that. You should probably watch. I think you would enjoy it. I
definitely
don't
want
know
to
what
watch
he's going to
that.
say. I have no idea what he's going to say. But
No,
what's your
always
favorite
interested
theory?
in what people think about this. Well, my theory, I didn't make this up, but there's a famous article about this that has now been like quoted 1,000 times. They think that the reason we did it was because it's addictive, that the foods themselves, that grain, they're addictive. Wheat in
Huh.
particular, but all of them. So wheat, for instance, there's this thing called gluten, which you've probably heard of at this point.
Nice.
But when it's digested by most humans, it's turned into this other substance called gluteomorphine, which is exactly what it sounds
Oh,
like,
morphine. Yeah.
and it's addictive. And if you've ever tried to go gluten-free, you may know exactly how hard it is to kick that habit because you're eating it 3, 4, 5 times a day. You don't even realize it's addictive. You crave it. Like, oh, I have to have my bread. Oh, I couldn't live without that pasta. Oh, please give me another bowl of cereal. Oh, a cookie. You're just eating it all day long. And people will say, I could never go low carb because I could never give up bread. That's it. You're an addict. Like, that's just
Interesting.
it.
No, that's a very interesting point. Yeah.
We're addicted to it, right? I
Huh.
know that stuff calls my name. I completely understand. And I've been gluten free for like, I don't know, over 12 years now. It's the best thing I ever did, but it was not easy. Anyway, yeah, that's their theory is that like, this stuff's actually addictive, low level addictive. I mean, it's not crack. I'm like, we don't
It's
need
not
to over
math,
exaggerate
right?
it, but it is low level addictive. We get a little bit high from it, and then we want more of it. It was barely worth our time to harvest it. Wheat originally is tiny little seeds, and most seeds in nature are not worth the human effort to harvest them. We spend more calories harvesting than
Oh
we
yeah.
do get out of them, especially because we have to process them to make them edible. It's not worth it. Like it's a negative, it's a net energy loss. But
Right.
the annual grains, now we're getting to it. The annual grains, yes, some of them have big enough seed heads. Now, why are the annual grains bigger? Why are their seeds so much bigger? And there's a reason for this. The reason is we talked about perennials. They don't need big seeds to survive. They have other ways to reproduce themselves. So they will make seeds. It's true. I mean, I live in the redwoods again. They make these giant pine cones. That's a thing. They'll try it that way. But the vast majority of redwoods, that's not how they reproduce. When redwoods are old, they fall over. So they just go thump in the in the forest. You will hear it. It's a huge noise. And then what they have on the side of their trunks are these little spots called burls, which are very sought after by woodworkers because if you cut them off and you cut them open, it's this incredible swirly patterns on the inside. I'm not
Mhm.
encouraging anyone to do this. The redwoods need their burls, but they do make really beautiful, sort of inlays for
Mhm.
guitars and whatever. Anyway, they're very pretty, but the burls are like these they're little growths that stick out on the sides of the trees. And you can Google this and take a look at it if you want to see what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
When the tree falls over like that, they will start, that half-dead tree will start putting down roots into the ground and anchor itself and start getting nutrients that way. And the burls will shoot up and make new trees. So
Wow.
they put up a leader, and I see this all over the land where I live. They will put up that leader, and that becomes the new tree. And that is a way better reproductive strategy for redwoods than their seeds. Like this has been working for them for thousands of years, millions
Nice.
of years.
Yeah.
So it's the same. Like I'm looking outside. I have these incredibly invasive Himalayan blackberries, which are pretty much everywhere at this point. And they're really yummy, but man, are those things invasive. But it's the same thing. Those little, you can eat the berries, super yummy. Even my dogs love them. And there's those little tiny seeds, right? You get them stuck in your teeth. Like we all know what the seeds are like. But that's not really how they reproduce. You can do that. I mean, you can harvest those seeds and you can go ahead and do that. It's a total waste of your time because how they reproduce is by runner. You want to try to get these things out of your land, forget it. I mean, it's a lifelong process digging them out because constantly they're sending up more runners. They are everywhere in my meadow. Like, and I get out there every year. I'm going to get rid of them, and I dig, and we get rid of them, and then they're back. It's like it's just impossible, and it's an incredibly useful reproductive strategy is sending out runners. So
Yes.
yeah, perennials, they have all these other ways to reproduce. But the reason they have all these other ways is because they live a long time. So they've got plenty of time to reproduce and figure all this out and send out the runners and get really big and fall over and have the burls. And like that takes years to get that going, right? Annuals, they've got those 2 or 3 seasons. That's it. So all their entire reproductive strategy, all their energy goes to this one thing, and it's making that seed. And they've got to give that seed its best chance in life that it's ever going to have. So it's kind of like you want that starter home in a good neighborhood with the public school for your kids so they'll get to college. That's what that seed is. That's what that plant is doing. Like this seed needs the best chance in life I can possibly give it. So it's going to be a big seed, and it's going to have all kinds of nutrients inside it. And then it's going to be coated in all kinds of stuff so animals don't want to eat it. And then it's going to fall to the ground in the fall and then get buried in the soil, and it's going to lie dormant because that seed has got no chance of survival against that perennial root structure that's already there. But there will be a moment, and that moment is when there's an emergency. So there's a fire, there's a flood, there's a landslide, there's something terrible happens, and the soil is cleared. The perennials are gone for whatever reason, and all of a sudden there's no competition, and this is when the annuals spring to life. So they sprout, the conditions are ripe, and now it's time. And so for a few years you will have that piece of land wherever that emergency was will be coated in annuals. And so the way that I like to think about this is, let's say you cut your hand, you have a cooking accident, whatever, a bagel accident, you cut your hand, and you may need stitches. Probably you're going to need a Band-Aid or two. You've got a bandage on there. And that's the first aid. The first aid is holding your skin together just so you don't bleed out, right? Well, it's the same thing. The annuals are that Band-Aid. And then eventually your skin knits back together, right? That's what the perennials do. They knit back together over the surface of that soil. They put down more roots. Everything gets repaired. It may take a decade. It may take 1,000 years, depending on, how bad the emergency is. And those annuals are gone. They get closed out by the perennials again. They can't compete. But the same process starts over again. They have left their seeds in that soil, and eventually, when it's needed, they'll come back. So they're nature's first aid squad. And again, nature loves a community, and this is part of that community. It's protecting the soil because it's a biological emergency. For land life, it's an absolute emergency to have bare soil because we all depend on it, right? So that's what the annuals do, is they protect it, and that's their niche. That's the role that they fill in nature. But what it means is these seeds are bigger. They're way bigger on average, the seeds of annual plants, annual grasses. And humans realized it's just kind of barely worth our effort. We might try eating some of these. And they did. And the idea is they probably got addicted to them and wanted more of them. So we started to breed them so that they would be even bigger. And now it's insane. And like with that quote green revolution stuff, like the seed heads are absolutely enormous and the stalks are as small as they could possibly be, because we don't want the stalks. What we want is, the juicy grain part. That's what we're after, is that load of carbohydrate. And then agriculture always started as about 14 places around the globe, but it's always river valleys. And that's why, is because river valleys are so disturbed constantly, semi-constantly by flood, that there is always a wealth of annual plants that have figured out how to live there. Because they're needed a lot there. And that, again, the soil is cleared there all the time because of the flooding. So you're going to find way more seeds there. And so every once in a while, one of them like hit the human brain correctly. It was like, oh, okay, I think we might be able to eat this a little bit. Do we want to keep eating this? Do we survive if we keep eating this? Does anybody die of poison if we eat this? It's like, how can we process this to make it more edible? What do we do with this? And the theory is, yeah, we got this little rush from it. And to me, that rings true just because it's been my experience. I know how addictive gluten is, and yeah, I would have been one of them. So, right. So, what is agriculture? So, all of this is the background. This is why this is like, I don't have a slogan. I wish that I did, but I
Mm.
don't. Like, it's like you've got to get the background of how nature actually works. Like, what is life? How is it connected? Like, how is this process all part of one thing? So, this is the background just to get to what I'm about to really tell you, which is agriculture. The point of agriculture is that it destroys all of that because it's based on annual grains. And for those annual grains to actually survive, the land has to be cleared because that's what they do, right? That's their nature. They cannot survive against perennials. And you know this if you've ever gardened, right? Like if you look out your window and you want to grow lettuce or corn or tomatoes or watermelon or whatever your thing is, if you look out your window, most people, what you're going to see is a little plot of grass. You've got a backyard, or a few trees and bushes if you don't have a yard. And you know that if you want to plant lettuce or tomatoes, you have to clear that ground. You're going to have to dig up or smother one way or another. You've got to clear the ground though. You're going to have to get rid of that grass, and then you're going to have to put your whatevers in the ground, and keep clearing the grass because it's going to keep trying to come back. So you're going to be fighting a war your whole life to try to keep that grass out of that area where you want to garden, um, because it's a war. So this is what agriculture is. You take that living biotic community, you clear all the life off it, and I mean down to the bacteria. All of it has to go, and then you plant it to human use. And so it's biotic cleansing. And this is what has happened around the globe. So in all the places where agriculture started, you could go there now, and what you're going to find is more or less a desert. So the Fertile Crescent, quote unquote, nobody in their mind would call that place fertile now.
Right.
It's a moonscape, right? We've all seen, if I mean, I've never been there, but certainly most people are familiar with that landscape at this point because of the war, the Iraq War. Everybody saw pictures. Yeah, it's a lot of rock, and there's a little bit of scrubby growth here and there, and a lot of desert. It used to be so lush. I mean, there were so many trees, sunlight never touched the ground, right? And you could go around the world to all the same places. In India, the Indus River Valley, it's the same thing. I've never been, but I've certainly seen plenty of photographs, and it's like it's shiny in the sun from all the salt because it's just been completely like salinated from. This is one of the problems with agriculture, is that it eventually there's all the salt that gets drawn to the surface, and so it's like it looks like snow, and it's not, it's salt. And this is completely human activity that has done this. It's agriculture. And this is what happens when you take a biotic community and you destroy it. um, and it means that the human population will be temporarily much larger, because instead of sharing that land with all of this multitude of creatures, plants, animals, everybody, bacteria, they're all gone. You have had to push them out of the way to just grow humans. So temporarily, you'll have way more humans than you could have. So, for instance, in like a temperate forest, like where I live, it takes about 1 square mile for a hunter gatherer to live here, to support a human. So, 1 square mile, it seems about right. But if you were going to do that with agriculture, you'd only need an acre or two. That's because you're not sharing that land with anybody else. There's no mountain lions there. There's no grasses there. There's no trees there. There's no bears. There's no chipmunks. There's nobody. There's just you. There's just the humans. So yeah, the human population then gets really dense, but it's only temporary. And so this process is called civilization. The pattern of life that's made possible by agriculture is what's called civilization. So don't get confused by the definitions of civilization that are, oh, the highest, best kind of culture that's complicated and has all these different. That's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about this way of life that's made cities possible. And all of that is resting on the space of agriculture. It's hunter gatherers can't really do that. They can live in some densities, um, along like ocean areas and like coastlines and rivers where your protein comes to you in the form of fish. You can have permanent settlement. So like in the Pacific Northwest where I am, that is absolutely a thing. But mostly hunter-gatherers have to move around a lot. And that's fine. You have your territory, you know where you go in the winter and you know where you go in the summer. And everybody knows the number of people that can live there. You're not allowed to bust through that, because what it means is that everybody starves. So hunter-gatherers are very, very good at keeping their population at that level of sustainability.
Hmm.
I'm not saying it's not grim to have to do these things, but everybody knows it has to be done, or you will all starve and you will degrade the land base bit by bit until it's over. And nobody wants to do that because they love their land. We don't love our land. We don't even understand our land anymore. So that's the problem, is that we have this pattern now of human population at densities that require the importation of resources. Um, and so if you are in that city, even if it's a small town, and there's no way that you can support yourself on that land anymore. You've covered it in cement or stone or brick or whatever. You've driven all the life out of it. All of your food has to come from somewhere else. And not just the food, but the energy, the water, everything has to come from somewhere else. You have to go get it and bring it back in. And at that point, it doesn't actually matter what kind of, lovely, spiritual, peaceful values you might be trying to embody in this culture. You're going to be based on imperialism and genocide, because
Oh
you're
yeah.
going to have to conquer your neighbors and get their stuff.
Right.
Nobody willingly gives up their water, their trees, their fish, their land, their soil. But because the city has used up its own, it has to go out and get all that stuff from somewhere else. And that's the human pattern for the last 10,000 years. It's just one city state conquering the neighbors, taking all that stuff. These empires have gotten rather large at points in history, the Roman Empire, for instance.
Mhm.
The current empire certainly is basically
Sure.
global,
Yes.
but eventually they collapse. So the average civilization, there's been 34 civilizations, what we might call quote civilizations. They've lasted between 800 and about 2,000 years, literally until the soil gives up. Yeah, so that's the nature of it. And there's a really great book called Dirt,
Yeah,
The
I've heard of
Rise and
yours.
Fall
Yeah,
of
okay.
Civilizations. But yeah, David Montgomery, and he just goes through this process around the globe, like exactly what happens one by one. And here we are, and people still don't really, for whatever reason, they don't want to face the nature of this. And I think we're better off just facing reality. I always think that. It's not necessarily, I know it's not emotionally the easiest thing, but it's not like intellectually that difficult. Like this,
Right.
it doesn't require like, a genius level IQ. Like, yeah, you clear the life off the soil, you're going to kill it.
Right.
And then
Pretty straightforward.
you breed more people than can live there, and you're going to have problems. You're going to have to either reduce your population by some method or conquer your neighbors. And mostly what we do is we conquer our neighbors. So we've ended up in hierarchical, militarized, genocidally minded, racist, misogynist, kind of cultures now, and they bump up against each other all the time, but it's pretty much the same pattern wherever you go. And then sort of on the outskirts, you've got people still trying to do something different, just sort of hanging on by their fingernails. And who's going to win? I don't know. It's a race to the end here, because there's the people who should care the most about this problem don't seem to understand the nature of it.
Right.
And I include myself in this. I spent 20 years as a vegan. I didn't get it. I thought I was doing the right thing for justice and for the planet and for the animals. And it turned out I was doing exactly the wrong thing. Like, it could not have been the more wrong thing. Agriculture is where the problem starts. It's where the destruction of the problem began. And this is, we had a living planet, and now it's been skinned alive. And it's agriculture that did that. So every day we lose 200 species, go extinct. And it's because we've taken all the land.
Hmm.
And we just want to grow humans on it and do things for humans on it. And this is the pattern of agriculture. So this is where we are, right? We're up against the cliff now. Like, are we going to turn and face this, or are we just going to keep jumping off? I don't know.
Well, I agree with you 100%. I guess I'm not a cynic nor am I a pessimist, but I find it difficult to believe, just sort of according to probability, that 8 billion people are going to go back to hunter gatherer.
But they can't. I mean, the thing
Well,
is,
they certainly can.
we have to reduce our numbers, and we could do that in a way that respected human rights. We could all decide as grown-ups that we are on a vast level of overshoot, and that the planet is now at risk, and that nobody's going to be alive in a few hundred years if we don't do something. And let's make some better decisions together. Let's all just decide that we're not going to do this anymore. The number one thing that drops the birth rate around the world is really simple. It's empowering women and girls. Literally,
Yes.
the number one thing is
Right.
teaching a girl to read.
Right.
That's like the fulcrum of the whole thing. That when women and girls have even that much more power over their own lives, they will choose to have fewer children, just
Right.
naturally.
Right.
As it turns out, when everybody has enough food and water and access to healthcare, the average couple only wants just over 2 children, which is replacement levels.
Right.
So you actually have to apply various kinds of political pressure to get people as a whole, as a group, as a culture to want more than that. And so those pressures have been applied. You've got the Catholic Church, for instance, all kinds of ideologies out there telling everybody, oh, you need to blah, blah, blah. And, all things being equal and everybody having the kind of empowerment they need, that's what it settles down to. Most couples want about 2 kids.
Right.
More than that, and it turns out that they're just not happy. Like the adults want to have other lives as well. It's not that they don't love their children. Of course they do. Most people would die for their children.
Sure.
But we also, as adults, want to do other things. They want to keep being musicians, or they want to keep doing, the things that they love. And it's really hard the more children you have. It's like
Sure.
2 seems about right. Most people can handle that, be happy, and still have lives. So this is not a hard sell. Like, it's not actually people versus the planet. It's people plus the planet. If
Right.
we give everybody what they need, this will happen naturally. And if we can apply just a few nice carrots to the situation and some education, I think in a few generations, we could get down to what would be a sustainable level. I don't think we need to be looking at, like, the one-child horrors of China. I am not talking about anything like that. It didn't even work, and it just kind of wrecked everything. So,
Right.
I mean, especially women's rights, it's been horrendous.
Right.
The more you read about that, is like, this is horrible.
Yeah.
But we don't need to do anything like that. And people don't need to be afraid to talk about this. It's like just giving, and it's the girls who need it the most. It's the poor girls, and they're mostly girls of color. They're going to be brown, and nobody seems to care about them anymore. And it's like, if you could just uplift them a little bit, just give them what they need, the rest of it falls into place.
Well,
So I just don't want us to be afraid of this topic, because there's girls who need our help, and it's such a simple thing. Just
Yeah.
give them a little bit of empowerment, and the rest will work itself out. So I'm not out of hope here. So I have this thing about the girls and the grasses, because that's the hope, is we give the girls what we need, and then we let the grasses come home. Because if the grasses and the ruminants are left to do the thing that they do best, which is build soil, we could sequester all of that extra carbon. It wouldn't even take that long. By some calculations, if we could repair even about 80% of the world's agricultural land, which means, frankly, taking it away from agriculture, letting it, go back to what it wants to be, which is a grassland, helping the ruminants come back, letting them behave the way they're supposed to. We could sequester most of the carbon that's been released since the beginning of the industrial age. It would take about 15 years. So that's not even that long amount of time. And there's all kinds of calculations about the United States alone, what we could be doing in this country. And the farmers themselves would be happier, because most people who switch to grass-based farming and are raising a product like, grass-based bison or beef, you do it right, you can often make a profit the first year, and they will never make a profit making corn and soy. They are forever dependent on the farm bill every year, to pay them some reasonable amount for their
you're right.
corn.
The economics of it is
It's horrible.
astonishing as well. But yeah, no, I
Yeah.
mean, agriculture is just you said earlier, is remarkably inefficient. I mean, it's devastatingly inefficient. As far as like the net gain or net loss, it's like massively in the loss as far as like energy use and comparative calories that you get from the grains that you put into like growing the grains or whatever it is. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's
Yeah, and it's
absurd.
only possible because of fossil fuel. I just want people to understand this. There's basically not a human being alive right now who doesn't have nitrogen from fossil fuel in their bodies. And for most of us, that number is about 50%. 50% of the nitrogen in most human bodies right now is from fossil fuel, is from the Haber-Bosch process.
Ew,
This is insane. We're literally eating oil.
that's gross. That's just icky.
Yeah, and I want everybody to understand this. The oil does not reproduce.
Right.
We are going to run out of oil.
Right.
And I get blamed for all kinds of horrible things. Oh, you want a genocide. You want to kill 6 billion people. I don't want to kill anybody. I just want everybody to face the facts. You're all going to die if we don't do something about this. Where do you think it's going to come from when it's gone? And I mean, not gone. There'll still be oil in the ground, but it won't be worth pumping out anymore. It'll take more energy to get it out of the ground than we'll get from it. And at that point, the situation is completely over. And then what, people? We've just made the situation worse. And every day this goes on, we're in a worse position for the future. So it just seems to me like the logical thing, the rational thing, for all of us to sit down and have a conversation about this. Is this really what we want? Do we want to eat our planet to the bone? 200 species a day? There's not a great future for your children and your grandchildren in any of this. There might not even be oxygen in 100 years, because the oceans have absorbed so much carbon from the carbon we've burned as industrial humans. They're so acid now from all of that carbon that the plankton populations are collapsing. And I just want people to hear this number: 2 out of 3. 2 out of 3 animal breaths are made possible by the oxygen that plankton produce. I don't know where we think we're going to get oxygen. We can't make oxygen. Okay. This is where it comes from. If we kill all the plankton, it's over. It's over. It's just game over on planet Earth. So this is what we're looking at. And oh, we're not supposed to talk about the apocalypse. Fine. I don't care what name you want to call it. We are in a very bad situation. We can at least agree to that.
Mhm.
But there are ways out. Like we just can repair. We can withdraw our numbers to something reasonable. We don't have to hurt anybody to do this. We just all have to agree that we're going to do it. Give women and girls what they need, and then let the bison and the grasses come back. And we'd all be a lot happier. I mean, we've had like how many generations now? 3, 4 generations of this like insane industrial levels of consumption. And half the people in America have been on an antidepressant at some point in their lives. We're actually like the loneliest, most miserable people that have ever existed.
You're right.
We really are. Like it
Yeah.
didn't even make us happy to have all this stuff. This is not what humans need.
Right.
It's just honestly not. Like capitalism wrecked us.
Yeah.
And now we've got like all the social media stuff. Like forget
Yeah.
the internet.
Yeah.
It's wretched. And the kids now are just their levels of anxiety and like
Oh.
suicidality and all it's just off the charts. I feel so bad for the 14-year-olds of today. It was hard enough when I was a kid. This just seems like it's insane what they're going through. They never talk to their friends anymore. It's all on screen. And they can't ever leave it behind. So the bullying never ends, right? Like the constant comparison. You're always on display to yourself. It's like I call it the pornopticon. Like you can't get away from it.
The what?
The pornopticon instead of the panopticon, we've got the pornopticon.
Okay. I
So
got. I
like,
got.
these poor teenage girls are just always on display and they're always being objectified and they always have to do it to themselves. Like you're the watcher watching yourself be watched. You can't get away from it. Is it any wonder they're so anxious and filled with such self-hatred? So it didn't even make us happy to do any of this.
Right. No, absolutely. And also, like, I just read an article recently about like how like cultures thousands of years ago and so on and so forth. Like archaeologists will find bones and so on, and like they have this like full beautiful set of teeth, and like but that's counterintuitive to us nowadays because well, wait, we have like dental hygiene and dentists and toothbrush and everything. Why are our teeth so bad compared to them? Well, it's because they didn't eat sugar.
Yep.
So that's literally the conclusion. Like they didn't have sugar. The sugar is what causes tooth decay for the most part, unless you
Yeah.
have some sort of pathogen, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
That's the first thing that it's as universal. When you find the archaeological record, you can tell like within 10 seconds whether it was a hunter-gatherer or a farmer, because the hunter-gatherers always have beautiful teeth fit in their mouths. Their third molars come in with no problem, really strong jaws, beautiful bones, joints, everything's looking good, strong, healthy, dense. And then the farmers, they immediately they take up agriculture. Everybody it shrinks 6 inches and their teeth start falling out. So you can look at those bones, they're brittle, they're covered in diseases, the joints are, a mess. It's so obvious who are the farmers. And so it didn't even make us healthy at the end of the day. And then also the autoimmune diseases start. So there's a
Mhm.
reason these things are called the diseases of civilization,
Right.
right? Because when you take up farming, agriculture, this is what happens around the globe. It's the same pattern everywhere. And the really grim example for me is when wheat hits Europe. So it spreads from the Near East across and it spreads by genocide. Let's be very clear. It's nothing but weapons. Okay, so it starts to spread. It took about 300 years to pretty much cover most of Europe, and what follows right behind it is rheumatoid arthritis. It's
Yep.
not seen in the fossil record before that. And the moment people start eating wheat across Europe, they get rheumatoid. So here come the autoimmune diseases, and I say this as someone who has 3 of them. Like I know where it comes from. It's pretty grim. So they shrink, their teeth fall out. There's a string of diseases. A lot of them are just frank nutritional deficiency. So a lot of it is lack of iron, especially for growing children. So it's like their skulls have like porous holes in them essentially,
Mhm.
which apparently is like it's called orbita cribita, and it's this incredibly painful thing that happens to children in agricultural societies. Never happens to hunter gatherers. And it's just surely the lack of iron in the diet because
Mhm.
they're weaned onto like soft cereal foods instead
Mhm.
of a chewy piece of bony meat like what
Mhm.
they should be eating. It's just sugar essentially. Like I said, it's just nothing but cheap carbohydrate. And that's what happens. Is the iron deficiency is like really grim. So all kinds of signs in the archaeological record that are Interesting and horrifying to read about.
Hmm.
Yeah, lots of stuff there, but it just didn't do us any good to even start this process. So it was Jared Diamond says it's the worst mistake in the history of the human race. There's a famous
Is that
interview.
the dirt book guy?
Yeah. He runs
So wait,
fields
so
in
you said
Nebraska.
the name of the book is Dirt. Is it an acronym or
No,
just
that's
Dirt?
David Montgomery.
Okay.
Jared Diamond wrote Collapse, and he wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel,
Oh, that guy.
and
Oh,
a
that's
bunch
cool.
of other books. Yeah,
Very
but his
popular
famous
book.
article from like 15 years ago was called the worst mistake in the history of the human race. It was in Nature. And if you just want to understand what I'm saying, like if this is like totally overwhelming you, just go read his article because it's all there and it's laid
Okay.
out very beautifully. And there it all is. Like, well, this is what we did, and it's been horrible for the planet and really bad for our cultures and a disaster for human health. And what in the world were we thinking? Because we're at the end now, and it's not looking good. So it's a great article. It's a short read. It will explain it all. Yeah,
Okay.
it had a huge impact on me. Let me tell you.
Yeah, clearly. No, I would love to read that, and I'm going to do that hopefully soon. The name of the author for Dirt again, because I want to read that book.
David Montgomery.
David Montgomery. I know that name. Why do I know that
Yeah, no, he also wrote a book about salmon that's called, I think it's called Salmon, the King of Fish,
name?
something
Okay.
like that. He's written a bunch of really good books. He's I'm totally on his wavelength. Like it's everything he writes is
Dirt,
really
David Montgomery. Okay, cool. Not to be
David
confused, folks,
Montgomery.
with
Yeah.
the book Dirt, written about Motley Crue.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's where we are. So yeah, we need to just face the facts. Like there's this great quote from James Howard Kunstler where he says we need to be reality-based adults. And that's how I feel a lot. It's like we really could do something about this. I'm not out of hope. We still could do it. We could get the
Oh, well,
carbon out of the
certainly we
sky.
could do it. Right.
We could
It's definitely
absolutely do
not.
this.
It's not impossible.
There's no rule of physics or chemistry that we have to violate to get this done.
Right.
But it's all political. It's like, these
Right.
vast institutions that are headed in the wrong direction, and we got to turn them all around. And that's the problem. And so it's we need
Right.
human will. We need some inspiration, we need some passion, and we need some commitment, and we need to be headed in the right direction. And this is, part of the problem that I think a lot of the environmental movement, we all sort of got captured by this, this sort of the vegetarian thing, and like it's just the wrong direction completely. And I learned it the hard way. So
Yeah, no, and that's okay though. I mean, you have a firsthand experience as to why, besides just the data, the intellectual aspect, firsthand why, which is always a very good way of knowing things. But we only got like 8 minutes left. I want to talk about the moral aspects of
sure.
that people claim for vegetarianism or veganism. Like you said in your book, something like, their hearts are in the right place, they're just kind of mistaken with their goal, or their methods. For sure that is true. And I've seen, I don't want to laugh at them. I've seen vegetarians or vegans call it like a holocaust and like that kind of thing. And there's no doubt that if you ever watch some documentaries, and admittedly they're sort of like PETA based or stuff like that, about commercial what's it called, the raising
Factory farming.
what's that?
Factory farming.
Factory farming. Thank you.
Yeah.
Factory farming of animals is horrifyingly
Horrible.
awful. Horrifyingly
Awful.
awful.
No, it's horrendous. Like we all can agree. If you have a pulse and you can breathe, there's no way out. You have to agree. It's horrendous. Like
So
no
you're a
sentient
psychopath if you think it's okay.
wretched stuff. No, it's horrible. And it's one of the reasons I became a vegan. Like I saw those
Right.
photographs, I was like,
Right.
no, I'm not. I don't want any part of it. And it's good. That's the right impulse. It's the right impulse to have
Right.
that.
For
I'm
that.
not
For
telling
factory
anybody that animals don't matter. I'm saying animals do matter, and they
farming. Right.
matter way more than you could know. And we need to protect them. And yes, we can all agree factory farming. It doesn't matter what you eat.
And there's a
Factory farming
very
is not
moral, compassionate, humane way of raising, treating, and even like killing animals for our food consumption. I mean, it can be done. You want to
Yeah,
minimize
and
the suffering of the animals, of course. You don't want to treat them like just whatever. But I mean, it can be done. I mean, grass-fed, free range stuff like that. Those are steps in the right direction. And if you ever had a grass-fed ribeye steak,
it's so good.
oh my God! Like you can tell right away the difference. It's
It
fabulous.
tastes like
Anyway, sorry.
nothing. It's completely different. Well, and the fatty acids are different, so the taste is going to be different. But it's a taste that we evolved. This is what we evolved on the African savanna,
Right.
eating the large ruminants that were eating the grasses. So the exact profile of grass-fed beef or bison matches our evolutionary template precisely. because literally that's how we became human, was from eating those animals. So of
The frontal
course,
lobe.
you take one bite of that food, you're like, this is like nothing else. It's right. It's exactly right. And it's true. Now, if you eat beef from a factory farm, it's all wrong. The fatty acid profile is completely off, and even the amino acid profile is completely off. So it does not taste the same, and you're not going to get that same happy hit from it.
Yeah.
There's a
So
reason. Yeah.
also on the moral landscape of this, it's important, I think, for vegans and vegetarians who are doing it for moral reasons to realize that when you go into like clear a land space to grow things, you're killing not only the microbial ecosystems, which are very much alive, living little critters. Plants are living things, and grass is a living thing. You're killing voles and moles and prairie dogs and groundhogs and whatever little critters mice and whatever else are living in the soil or around the soil. There's all sorts of animals that you are killing just in order to grow food to not kill animals. Okay, and
Yeah,
go ahead,
yeah.
sir.
Well, there's two parts of the death here. The one is when you do the initial clearing of that land. I mean, you're just shoving all those animals off into extinction.
Right.
Right. So it's mass extinction is what we're talking about. We're talking about the utter devastation of every last biotic community that could possibly have supported agriculture. It's been taken.
Right.
And I want people to understand that 98% of the world's old-growth forests and 99% of the world's prairies are gone. And
Right.
this is why they're gone, is because agricultural humans took them. So you cannot say that something that has destroyed 98% of the habitat for animals is in any way good for animals. And I want everybody just to sit with that for a minute, because this was the thing I could not face when I was a vegan. And it's horrible, right? This is what we've done to the planet. We've skinned it alive, and we've just made it a place for humans. So it's like 86% of the primary and secondary productivity of the planet now goes essentially to humans, right? You cannot think that this is a good idea. Those habitats have got to be restored, and it means we have to stop doing agriculture. So that's number one. But number two is, even once you plant that into a wheat field or a cornfield or whatever you've got, there are still a whole bunch of smaller animals that are going to try to live there. So you've got birds, you've got rodents, like you said, the little critters, snakes, they're all going to live there. And when you go in with the combine and harvest that grain, the estimate is it's about 1,000 animals per acre are being ground up into that combine.
Oh.
And you should talk to anybody who has ever had to use one of those machines. The last 2-3 acres is horrible, and they dread it because it's so traumatizing. Because any animal that's been able to run has run, and they are waiting. They're hiding inside that last acre that's still has wheat standing, and they're just in terror. And then you put the combine through it, and it's literally just a bloodbath behind you, because it's just all of those animals that had to run there to try to hide. And there's no hiding. There's no hiding from the machine, as we know. You cannot hide from it. It's coming for all of us. So it comes for those animals. And that's what goes into your wheat and your corn and your soy. You've got the utter devastation of that whole biome. And then you have, on top of it, every season, all of those animals that are still trying somehow to survive. And they all get killed so that you can have your wheat and your soy. And you can't, it's no good pretending that there's a death-free option, because there's not. In the meantime, you've killed all these animals, some of them quite permanently, into extinction. Now let's compare that with the kind of diet that some of us are eating, which would be, a diet based on leaving that prairie in place. You've got all of those grasses living there, all of those prairie plants, 25 of them per square meter. And then you've got some ruminants coming through every once in a while. And then the humans following it and eating that ruminant. I'm killing one animal, literally one animal for a year. That's it. Okay. Yeah. You can't say that if you're eating an agricultural diet. Is so many more dead animals are involved in the clearing, the harvesting, the production of that grain. That's what it is. So, we've asked the wrong question. And this was the question I had when I was a vegan. I would look down on my plate. I was like, is there something dead on my plate? And if all I saw was rice and beans, I was like, no, this is great. This is peaceful. This is sustainable. This is wonderful. I was completely wrong.
Right.
It's not what's dead on your plate. It's what died to get that food on your plate. It's a much bigger question. And it's a much harder question, but you're going to come up with really different answers. If you get to the bottom of it, you're going to come up with really different answers than the rice and the beans.
Right. That's you painted a very vivid image with the combine and everything. Reminded me of the movie Secret of Nim. You ever seen that?
Yeah.
Right, where the auntie, shrew had to pull the gas thing so they didn't run over the house, and that's something too, is the sentience of plants and the little critters and stuff like that, because a lot of people draw the line at sentience, or the degree of sentience, of self-awareness or something. I've heard that argument before, And I think they're actually just sort of covering the fact that they could see a face, it looks cute, so they don't want to eat it, which is okay. But
Well,
as you
there's
just,
reasons for that too. Like,
what's that?
there's reasons for that. You know, we're
Yeah.
mammals, and we
Yes.
are, as mammals, extremely dependent for a long time on our caregivers.
Hmm.
We need to have this really primary bond with cute faces, or we never would have made it. Our parents would have killed us. You know, it's like
I've heard that
that's a really
evolution made
profound instinct in
babies
humans.
cute, right?
We have to look cute. We do. And that's why we love puppies and we love kittens and we love baby horses and
Right, right.
anything that has a face. We're like, oh, look at that. There's a whole like internet world where you can go find pictures of like, it looks like a face and people will put up these like, it's an apartment building. It looks like a face. It's a car. It looks like a face. We all recognize the face and we're
Huh.
drawn to it. Like, I get it. Like, it's a thing. It's very, very important for humans, especially to recognize cute faces. So there's a reason that we, kind of valorize this. Like, this is why it's so
Mhm.
important,
Mhm.
but it's not rational. Like, that does not actually give things with faces don't have more moral standing, things without faces. They're all
Right,
living creatures.
right.
And the entire world depends on all of those creatures working together in whatever niche we developed as a community. You can't say that one is more important than the other. None of us are. Without all of us doing our part, the whole thing collapses. So we can still love the creatures with cute faces. I mean, I have 5 dogs. I get it. But that's not, you can't build the moral standing on that.
Right.
And when I was a vegan, I had a really hard time with this because I also drew that line like, okay, these creatures count and these don't. And so I'm allowed to eat those and not feel guilty. But it never sat well with me because I realized all I was doing was pushing that line a little further over in one direction. But I was doing the same thing that meat eaters did. The meat eaters who said, okay, well, humans count, maybe some other primates count. Nobody else really counts. We're allowed to do whatever we want. And I was saying, all right, well, all these other creatures count, but there's still a line here. And the line for me is going to be between most animals, maybe not all animals. I don't know about insects. Oh, I can't think about insects. I don't want to think about their animals. I don't want to think about it. But no plants, certainly. It's fine to eat them. And so I just moved the line, but I didn't get rid of the line. There was still a line where I was saying some creatures counted and some didn't. And I always hated that. It was like, oh, look, I still have a kind of human supremacy here and I don't like it and it doesn't sit well with me. And then you can take it or leave it. But I mean, I've had conversations with trees. It's like, I know they're sentient. I mean, come on. And I'm not trying to convince anybody of that. You don't have to have conversations with trees. I don't care. There's actually plenty of scientific research now about the sentience of plants. They make decisions, they help each other. They're very altruistic. They keep each other alive. Here in the redwoods, there are redwood trees that are actually albinos. So they're missing the pigment.
Huh.
They're not green. They're this sort of strange gray color,
Yeah.
and they can't photosynthesize. That's
Huh.
why they're not green, right?
Right.
They're missing that thing, whatever that thing is. They
Whatever
don't
that
have
thing
it.
is. Yeah.
Chloroplast, whatever. I don't even know.
I think it's
But
chlorophyll.
anyway, the point
Chlorophyll.
is, they're alive. How are they alive? They're alive because everybody in their family, connected in their root system, keeps them alive. They hear the distress call that they need nutrients and they send them everything they need through the roots. And that's why there are these albino redwoods. Now, they will never reach the same stature as the other redwoods. They're always really short, but they're alive and they live a long time. And they're only alive because the other trees take care of them. And there are so many examples of that across the plant world where they are thinking and they are making decisions. And sometimes they make bad decisions, but they help each other. For instance, if a deer is wandering through the forest and eats some leaves, that plant will waste the energy to send out the signal. They Plants communicate by chemicals. They don't communicate by words. They don't hear, but they
Mhm.
get very complex messages, both sent out through the air and especially through the roots. So that plant that's being eaten will use some energy to warn everybody else in that community, and will
Mhm.
send out the emergency message to say, I'm being chomped right now. You need to get ready. This browser is coming on through and you might be next. And so all the other plants, near that plant that's getting attacked will put out chemicals. So immediately emergency chemicals into their leaves so that they won't be as tasty to the deer that's coming through, and will also stiffen themselves so that some more chemicals are made that make them a little bit stiffer so that they can withstand the pressure of the deer body walking by. But that plant is warning her friends, saying,
Mhm. Mhm.
danger is coming, just like you would, you know? You
Yes.
would warn your neighbors if the flood was coming and they didn't know about it. You would warn your
Some.
neighbors if there was some crazy guy with an axe running down the street. It's the same thing. We warn our friends.
Right.
Plants do that. They do all kinds of complicated things like that to help each other and to make the community stronger. So, um, and then every single indigenous community, culture on the planet has some concept of plants as being the elders. And they're right. They were here first, and they created the oxygen so that animals could evolve and leave the ocean. Without them, we would not be here. So they are our grandparents, and they deserve our respect.
Interesting.
And there's usually ways that you would be given to communicate with plants, and ask them for help, because they always say if we ask humbly for help, they love us and they will help us. I don't know why they still love us considering what we've done to them, but apparently they do. So if you ask for help, you'll be given medicine. You can be given in the form of herbs, different roots, that kind of just physical medicine, but also spiritual medicine. You may be given help from the trees or from the flower or from the whatever. If you go and ask and you pray, they can help you. And I don't care if people think this is woo. There is not a human culture anywhere that hasn't believed some form of this. And I will say the cultures that believed that did not turn the world into a desert. The people who don't believe it are doing their best to wipe all the life off the planet. So take your pick here, people. But the plants are alive, and they are quite sentient. And they have a great deal to tell us if we will listen.
You there?
Yep.
Okay, something happened there. No, that was fabulously said, and because I was going to mention all that. I've read books called The Life of Trees, The Life of Plants, and stuff like that.
Those are great books, aren't they?
They're amazing, and I'm very involved in the more pagan, magical side of life than as a philosophy, and I believe you refer to yourself as a witch before on Facebook. Yes. Totally. And I agree. I've had conversations with trees and plants and the wind. Absolutely, it is the whole Earth it's the Gaia hypothesis. The whole Earth is a living sentient being. It's alive, and it's like the world is magical. It literally is magical. I'm not using that figuratively.
No, it is.
It is fantastical. It is magical. It is beautiful. It is wonderful. And if you disconnect yourself from it, you are missing out on the better aspects of being a person.
And then you will kill it because you don't care about it, because you're not interested in a relationship with it anymore. You're just looking at it as something to be exploited. And then here we are in a planet that's turning into a desert.
Right. Well, okay, great. I'm glad we started a little early because we went over an hour. That was just great. It's always fabulous talking to you. You're so well informed and so articulate with all these things, and then, like, reading your book. Just read her books because she just has a lot of profound, good, logically, scientifically based data. She's not just making this up. Okay, this isn't just her personal opinion. This is good stuff here. And your writing, and I read a lot. Your writing is just wonderful. You're a wonderful author to read. I remember there are certain authors the story's interesting, but the writing is lame. You're wonderful, in all possible ways.
Oh, thank you.
You're very welcome. And we're definitely going to have you back on, and maybe we can have Derek on as well. I thought about him a lot as you were talking about certain things, like the going off carbs thing, going from vegan to thing. I remember him doing a podcast, something talking about how he had to go off potato chips and how he didn't like that. He didn't like that.
No.
But I've tried the keto thing. I'm not there now, admittedly. But it was. I tell you what, I felt great, and I lost weight like that. I'm type 2 diabetes, and it's my blood sugar dropped immediately.
Yeah, you gotta. It's hard, but you gotta do it.
It is hard for some. It wasn't hard.
Sugar is really addictive. I completely understand. I can't have it in the house because I'll just eat it.
No, I agree. I live with my Italian. This is not an excuse, Lierre. It's just more of an explanation. I live with my Italian mother.
Oh, yeah. No, it's hard. And it's like the food of your childhood. I completely understand all of this. It is really hard.
It is hard, but worthwhile. At least look into it, please. I did have a protein urea scare, in my kidneys, so that's something I also my doctor's not. I'm like, hey, well, what if I went on the high protein? He's like, I don't know, dude. So I might have missed my window just because I abused my body so much in my 20s and 30s. But generally speaking, it's definitely a better idea. I agree. And there's so much more to discuss. As you were talking, I had so many questions and stuff like that, but I didn't want to interrupt. So I guess we're just going to have you on again.
Okay. Poor us. We'll have to do it again.
Yeah, poor us. Okay. Everybody, thanks for tuning into the Illinois Green Party series. I'm your host, David Rych. Special thanks to Lierre Keith, co-founder of the Deep Green Resistance, which please, by the way, go and check out. It's a wonderful organization doing a lot of good for a lot of people and the world. And read her books, The Vegetarian Myth And what was the one that you co-authored with Derek?
Bright Green Lies.
Bright Green Lies. Thank you. Oh yeah, so that's extremely interesting too. We've talked about that
That's
before, but
another
we might need an update on that one, because as you said, like the green movement, again, their heart's in the right place, but there's certain things they're doing that is not nearly as green as you think it is.
All I've done is write books that make people hate me, and this is not my goal, but it's just where it ends up. So yeah, please go read Bright Green Lies. Yeah.
I think I said in a text to you recently, like, you know, if you're pissing somebody off, you're doing something right.
That's right. I'll think of it that way. Okay.
Just don't become jaded. That's the worst part of it. Or cynical. All right, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in. Till next time, be good. Be green. Later. Lierre, hold on one second, okay?